Alright, it's already time for round 1, so let's play first. And this looks like a great hand. I am missing the second white source for the Harrier, but otherwise this hand is perfectly fine, so definitely not a mulligan. I have ways to get additional mana. I have a Trapper to tap down opposing stuff. The Trapper of course also wants a second or even a third planes, but I think that this will be more than fine. Gilded Light, a card that I could cycle at some point if my opponent isn't looking like he is going to be targeting me a lot. Against Storm, Gilded Light is actually a very nice main deck card. Let's see if I draw a land here. Goblin Trenches. So now I know that my lands will be quite valuable in the long run. And because I don't want to miss a land drop here, I'm gonna Mountain Cycle the Cougar. Get the Mountain, and then I also have Solar Blast next turn, which could actually be relevant if my opponent drops a 1 toughness creature. Oh, also a Plains Cycler on the opposing side. This is an Eternal Dragon that starts coming back for 5, so a card that I will have to respect. It's not a 1 toughness creature, sadly. Gustlow Carrier on my opponent's side. Let's see if I can draw a land here. Thopter Squadron, no. Alright, so Goblin Trenches is only a late game card. I can't really make use of that. Solar Blast is fine, but I want to draw a Plains. So I'm cycling Gilded Light, leaving open the Plains, and then I will at least have the Trapper available. I did opt to only include 16 lands in this deck, so being stuck on 3 is something that can definitely happen. And that's a Mystic Zealot. 2/4 for now, but it's going to turn into a 3/5 flyer. So with the Plains drawn, I like Mistmoon Griffin because it's gonna put Chartooth Cougar onto the battlefield if I block with it. That sounds pretty awesome. I could also cast Gustlow Carrier, but that isn't really better. Now, if my opponent kills the Banish Trapper somehow, it's still a fine deal. And my opponent is blue-white, so it's not really likely that that is going to happen. And now Gustlow Carrier, blocking Gustlow Carrier probably results in the Harrier just untapping and not dealing damage to me. I could also choose to just chump block Mystic Zealot and get the Mistmoon Griffin trigger that way. Let's see what ends up happening. Nothing. Alright, so the Harrier doesn't even attack. It would have been a free attack, to be honest. But oh well. So I drew the Tyros Faithful, which means that my defenses are pretty much set here. I don't really have good ways of attacking through the Harrier. I can attack with the Mistmoon Griffin into the Harrier, and then my opponent is most likely going to take it and then attack back with the Harrier. I have my own Harrier that I can cast. I also want to draw lands for the Squadron and the Trenches. So what I could do here is cycle Spark Spray and then see if I manage to draw a land and then what I want to cast. I don't have to rush casting the Faithful here. I'm not the biggest fan of cycling all these cards before I've found my Astral Slide, but I think it's just a reasonable thing to do. I'm going to attack here. I'm not too scared about what my opponent could do. And I also, now that I have the Faithful, I don't think that chump blocking the Zealot is really a reasonable play. This is getting countered. I'm not too concerned. Oh, well. Yeah, this is unfortunate. I was basically counting on the Trapper to be active, to prevent 2 damage to me. And that's why I thought I could attack with the Mistmoon Griffin. I also didn't want my opponent to know what I was casting. It's not a big deal. I'm basically taking 2 more damage than absolutely necessary, but yeah, as I've said, not the end of the world. What is going to be problematic is if my opponent ever gets 7 cards into his graveyard. Also, this Eternal Dragon is coming back at some point. So Benalish Trapper, actually quite important to my strategy. So if I cast the Faithful, then the 2 Zealots are offline and I have the Trapper active. Then I can cast Benevolent Bodyguard to have my Trapper protected forever, and my hand is actually looking quite strong. So I'm fine attacking with a Griffin here. I'm looking to be playing against blue-white control, and I don't know how my opponent's late game is looking, but I do know that there's an Eternal Dragon in my opponent's graveyard, so I don't want to give my opponent too much time if it's not absolutely necessary. Also, with the Goblin Trenches and Solar Blast, I have a reasonable option of just burning my opponent out, in a sense. Just dealing 3, sacking all my lands, attacking maybe 1 or 2 times. The 2 Zealots get in here. I'm gonna take 2 damage if my opponent doesn't cast anything. Now, there is open mana that I do have to respect. Opponent also chose not to return Eternal Dragon, so this could be an exile, for example, which is kind of unfortunate against Mistmoon Griffin. I also have a Gustclaw Carrier in the graveyard now, so the Griffin's trigger is actually a lot worse. I'm casting Benevolent Bodyguard, and then I'm seeing if there is a counterspell, and it's going to protect... I don't even want to protect the Mistmoon Griffin, but it would protect the Mistmoon Griffin. So if this gets exiled, I think I'm just allowing it. And if it's not, I'm also happy. Here, I want to keep on the mana for Trapper. And if my opponent wants to counter Goblin Trenches, I think I'm fine with that. It is a powerful card. And there is no immediate need for me to cast it. But with the Thopter Squadron, I have a card that I really don't want to see countered. Okay, it looks like it's a flash card or an instant at end of turn. Maybe some card draw. No. It was still my main phase, so maybe that's why my opponent is waiting. It's also possible that my opponent just didn't read Eternal Dragon correctly. So you have to activate the Eternal Dragon in your upkeep if you want to use it. Okay, it looks like my opponent is just fine with casting a Noble Temper. I don't really know what happened there exactly. Also, a Secluded Step, joining the party. Interesting choice to cast this when you already have 6 mana and you want to get cards into your graveyard. Does make me a bit concerned, to be honest. And I just want to get my cards onto the battlefield while I still can. I'm also going to diversify my threats a little bit, turn one of the +1/+1 counters into a Thopter, in case that my opponent has a removal spell for the Squadron. I'm tapping the Gustclaw Carrier anyway, so taking, I don't know, taking 2 additional damage or something like that is not what I'm concerned about. This is fine. Radiant's Judgment. Still quite confused why Eternal Dragon hasn't really been used aggressively by my opponent. Alright, what is this? Council's Judgment. Starting with you, okay, so basically my opponent votes for a card and that is just being killed. And that could very easily be Benalish Trapper. So the Trapper is just going to tab the Harrier in response. And now my opponent is just, because I can only tie the vote, it's definitely going to be my opponent's choice here. Council's Judgment. I think it's a commander card that was printed in Vintage Massives to make it available on Magic Online. So it's actually my time to vote now, but I have actually no idea what my opponent voted for. Interesting. So I'm gonna vote for this Thopter token. No, my opponent chose Goblin Trenchers. Yeah, that makes sense. So Goblin Trenchers is dead. Opponent bounces Mistmoon Griffin, that's fine. Man of War doing that. I still have my Banish Trapper, so at least the Eternal Dragon will not be too much of a problem. I'm still not sacrificing Benevolent Bodyguard. I think it's too important that I have the Trapper available. It's kind of unfortunate that I lost the trenches there. I thought if it wouldn't get countered that it was actually quite safe. All right, I'm very confused where my Thopter token went. What did I do wrong? Oh. So... I didn't really get this card. I didn't see anywhere that what my opponent chose, but if it's a vote, I think I would have been supposed to know what my opponent chose. So I kind of killed my own Thopter token, although it wasn't necessary. All right, I'm gonna have to find out about that, but now I'm just down a Thopter Foundry token. I'm over it. I'm over it, basically. So this is a nice draw, drawing a Flametongue Kavu here. My opponent is down to 4 cards in his, or up to 4 cards in his library, which does mean that I have to worry about the Mystic Zealots very, very shortly. It's going to be quite important to kill my opponent before that happens. So how do I do this? If I kill the Gustclaw Carrier with Flametongue Kavu, I actually put a 5th card into the graveyard, but that frees me up to just tap Mystic Zealot instead. One of the Mystic Zealots. I could also tap a Mystic Zealot just to not have to deal with a 3/5 in the long run. Alternatively, I just cast Mistmoon Griffin here this turn, because right now the Mystic Zealots are very unlikely to hit threshold. Yeah, I think that's even better. So I'm gonna cast Mistmoon Griffin, and because I won't have mana anyway, I'm gonna turn these into 2 1/1s. What is nice is if I manage to get... Okay, now we see the Upkeep Eternal Dragon, which is actually nice for me because Mystic Zealot is now even less likely to become thresholded. What is nice is getting Flametongue Kavu into my graveyard and then getting it back onto the battlefield with Mistmoon Griffin, but I think I'm actually just threatening lethal here very shortly. With none of these creatures able to block my flyers, despite the fact that I killed one of mine unnecessarily. Okay, now we have an effect here. It could be an exile, actually. Exile target non-white attacking creature, so this targets my 1/1. And my opponent gains 1 life. I can counter that with Benevolent Bodyguard. I'm dealing 3, my opponent goes to 6. Then actually 7 with the exile trigger. That means that my Solar Blast is not lethal even with the help of Flametongue Kavu next turn. I actually think that that is a good enough reason to use the Bodyguard here. I'm gonna give this protection from white so that the exile does not resolve, because that means my opponent is going down to 5, which means that I am in fact attacking for lethal next turn. If I Flametongue Kavu the Harrier, I can just let my opponent cast Eternal Dragon, tap it, and then win on the next turn. With 5 cards in my opponent's graveyard, 6 if Eternal Dragon is cycled, but if Eternal Dragon is cycled, I'm just tapping both of the Mystic Zealots. Let's see. There are 3 cards in my opponent's hand, so there might be... Oh, right. No. No solutions on my opponent's side. Alright. I have to be honest, my opponent's deck did look a bit better than mine. Don't really know what to make of that, but pretty sweet cards, I have to say, and a pretty nice late game from the looks of it. Don't think that land destruction or aftershocks is the right way of going about things. Burning of Zinnia seems particularly bad. Aftershock maybe could actually make an appearance. It does deal with Eternal Dragon, even only temporarily, it's also nice against 3/5 flyers if the game ever goes to that. I don't like Deathblade Elite. I don't think that I need Seal of Cleansing. And Shelter is kind of nice now that I know that my opponent has at least one exile. Brilliant Halo, probably not the kind of card that I want to be playing. I'm going to keep in all these kind of interactions, all the cycling cards. So it's really only the question if I want to get rid of some of the ground creatures, because I know that they are very likely to just get outclassed by my opponent. So Phantom Nomads on the draw against a deck with multiple Mystic Zealots doesn't actually seem amazing. I think I'm better off just playing 2 Shelters here, because this is such a control matchup that I want to make sure that my important creatures survive, and Banalish Trapper is definitely one of them. Countering an exile with Shelter is also pretty much the best you can do. Yeah, I like this. I'm expecting to play my opponent to play first, which he does. I have an Astral Slide, I have Banalish Trapper, I have some Cyclers. I'm gonna keep this hand. This could be it. This could be the Astral Slide. Time for Astral Slide. Oh, this could be time for Astral Slide Flametongue Kavu. But we'll have to be a bit patient and hopefully not run into Council of the Judgment or Power Sink again. If my opponent has a Power Sink here, I think he's Power Sinking the Trapper. Just casting everything I have. There's no reason to be afraid of a counter spell my opponent might not even have. Once again, only a single Plains for me. But my opponent's deck isn't the fastest, so... Oh, Mana War. That's kind of nice, I guess. Okay, if that had been a land, I think Astral Slide would have been the clear-cut play. Now that it's not, it's actually not the best. Although I think, yeah, I think I still play the Astral Slide here. And the reason is, if I don't draw land next turn, I'll have the option of Astral Sliding, well, cycling the Cougar, for example, to get a mountain, which in turn will allow me to slide out Mana War, which comes back and has to bounce a creature. So I can actually make sure that my opponent bounces his 5-drop, if I want that to happen. Now, another Shelter, not all that great. So I really don't want to expose any of my creatures, of course, to them getting bounced by Mana War. I do want to have a land drop here, and I kind of want to cast my creatures as well. This is kind of unfortunate. I don't have the mana for the Trapper, and I don't want to expose the Flametongue Kavu to a counterspell. I, in a sense, don't want to waste my Cyclers when I have an Astral Slide in play as well. It might be correct to just let my opponent cast something and then bounce it with Mana War. And then my opponent might be tapped out and I get to cast Flametongue Kavu. Yeah, I think it's actually correct to miss my land drop here. But also I'm not casting anything because I want to turn Mana War's ability into a disadvantage. And I'm actually just going to do it right now. If my opponent cycles, I'm fine with the Mana War just bouncing itself. Opponent also end-stepped it, so that's a Thopter Squadron, so now everything is going to work out quite nicely. Let's see what happens here. Beginning of combat, no, my opponent gets Mana War back. And I have to expect that the Mana War wants to bounce itself. If this bounces this Thopter Squadron, it wouldn't really make sense. Yep, alright. And I will just allow this to happen. I will get my mountain because I need the 4th land. And I'm not sliding out Thopter Squadron. So if you slide out the squadron at my end of in their end of turn, then it's not back until it's your turn again, and I can't afford that to happen. So here I am casting the Flametongue. It would be great if I had more mana, because then I would maybe be able to protect it from whatever my opponent was planning. If the Flametongue is bounced by Mana War, I'm very happy. If my opponent plays something, I'm also happy because I can slide out Flametongue Kavu. The only thing that could happen is that Flametongue Kavu dies here, and that would have been unfortunate. So it looks like my opponent is just holding Exile maybe, or trying to get the Flame Tongue Kavu by some other means. Could also be exile plus power sink. Because I have the 2 shelters, I'm not afraid to attack here. Could be a double exile, but I mean, that's not really too threatening. I have to be careful that Flame Tongue Kavu is not optional, so you can definitely kill your own creatures. If this is getting power synced, I'm also fine. I have to tap out against power sync. That's actually quite the powerful card in that regard, but I mean, trading my opponent's turn and hard counter, basically a hard counter for Solitary Troopers is fine. And I'm declining to do this once again. I could do this, but then my opponent just doesn't cast a creature, the Flame Tongue comes back, and I have to kill it. So, not something that I can afford to do. Let's see. Eternal Dragon at some point could come back. Okay, my opponent just has just found a card that's strong enough to fight with Flame Tongue Kavu, and Solar Blast is not quite enough to change that. Secluded Step, I think, is a card that I just have to cast. Doesn't really seem like I can do otherwise. I have to find a way to deal with the Eternal Dragon long term, and that's going to be probably just the Trapper, and maybe even with Shelter backup. Or I gain enough life with Tearwolf Faithful that it's actually not a concern. So the real question is if I want to cast the Trapper this turn, or the Faithful. I will take 3 damage, but I don't think that damage is particularly relevant right now. And having the Trapper 1 turn earlier is definitely valuable. I also have pretty much protection. I have the way to protect my creatures as long as I have Gilded Light up and 2 mana. And if my opponent casts something here, I have the option of just killing it end of turn by sliding out Flame Tongue Kavu. Alright, Mana War. What is Mana War bouncing? Alright, Banalish Trapper. Yeah, that's a reasonable choice. So I can protect the Banalish Trapper, or I can just slide out Flame Tongue Kavu. Maybe even in my opponent's main phase, so that it's back during my turn. I think recasting the Trapper is very reasonable, so I'm gonna allow this to happen. And my opponent is passing, so I'm gonna try to cycle. And I want to use this. So by now I should be finding lands, hopefully at some point. Mana War should go down. It does. So now there's 6 lands for me. Still the 2 shelters that I haven't been able to use. I kind of want to get Mistmoon Griffin down as well. But first of all the Trapper, just to be safer from what my opponent is planning here. At some point I have to deal with the Templar, and there's still potentially the Dragon to worry about. But even then I can probably just Solar Blast the Dragon, slide out Flame Tongue Kavu and beat it that way. Another Mana War. Bouncing Banalish Trapper? Yep. So I could shelter the Banalish Trapper here. Could have actually sheltered Ready Response. Then my opponent would have had to choose Flame Tongue or one of his own creatures, but I guess just bouncing Mana War at that stage. I think this is a good use of a shelter. I have too many of them in my hand anyway. And just killing Mana Wars with my slide triggers is not all that exciting. Alright, Counterspell traded for shelter. I will allow this to be bounced. And a Bodyguard. So from now on, once the Bodyguard is there, my creatures will not be in trouble anymore. Let's see. That's kind of interesting. I kind of want to get the Faithful onto the board as well. But that would mean I'm tapping out. I'm still taking a lot less damage though. I think my opponent is pretty much out of gas at this stage. And even if there's something good, I still have quite a lot of gas in my hand. So in the worst case, there is some kind of mass removal waiting for me here. And then I still have Mistmoon Griffin to somewhat recover from that. Eternal Dragon is returned to my opponent's hand in his upkeep. No attacks, nothing else. Alright. Forgotten Cave, I'm definitely keeping that. Now I want the Bodyguard in play. Or do I want the Mistmoon Griffin instead? I do want to get on the aggressive, on the offensive. Yeah, I think Mistmoon Griffin is better, just to deal more damage. It would be great to get rid of the Man of War. Maybe tap down the Noble Templar. Alright, of course, Eternal Dragon. So what I could do here is use Forgotten Cave in conjunction with Flametongue Kavu to get rid of Man of War. It's not the greatest use of a cycling effect, but I think I want to deal some damage here. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that are a lot worse than sliding out Flametongue. Even if it's just for Man of War. So that goes down. I'm going to tap the dragon because I won't be able to kill it immediately. Then can play this Plains, tap down the Templar. I'm not sliding out the Templar, so here attack for 6 is easy. Maybe I want to attack for 7. That seems excessive. I can just block the Noble Templar, so I think that's actually better. And then I cycle Solar Blast, dealing 1 to Eternal Dragon, sliding out Flametongue. Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. Draw a card, a nice Thopter Squadron. I can still drop the Bodyguard. And then my Flametongue comes back, shoots the dragon. My opponent only has a 3/6 in play. Now has Threshold, 7 cards in my opponent's library. But with the Trapper, another Shelter, I think I'll be fine. So let's see what my opponent wants to bounce here. I might also spend the Shelter to counter that, draw another card. Yeah, the Bodyguard makes sense. Well, I don't really know if it makes sense. But if my opponent wants to bounce the Bodyguard, I'm actually happy to let that resolve. I can just recast for a single mana. And if my opponent wants to play a more expensive targeting effect, then Shelter still blows him out. So this could actually mean that there's an exile in my opponent's hand, but my opponent knows that I'm just able to recast the Bodyguard, so I'm not sure what this is supposed to do. Alright, something else. Radiant's Judgment. Alright, so I can now use my Shelter very effectively. Give this protection from white, draw another Trapper. This is countered. It's my turn. Now, Noble Templar is another Cycler, which is great. I'm not sure if I have to play around any mass removal. I don't really think that's the case, especially not with a Mistmoon Griffin on my side. And also I can't really afford to play a super long game against what my opponent has here. I can't really beat all these cards long term, so I'm just playing everything. Well, maybe I should better leave up just the protection for Flametongue Kavu. That seems very reasonable. Now, in the case of a mass removal, I still have Astral Slide to protect one of my creatures. And I'm definitely beating Eternal Dragon Recursion. There's no way that is beating me. Alright, this card again. So now my opponent is going to vote for something and I once again won't know what it is. It's probably going to be Astral Slide. So what I can do is I can also click on Astral Slide because I kind of know that that's going to be what my opponent chooses. So let me just look if... Yeah, I just don't know what the card is. My opponent conceded. I don't know if that's supposed to be like this, if the votes are secret, but they definitely look like they are secret on Magic Online. I won the match though, so I'm not complaining. See you in round 2.